Better. There we go. Hello. Hi. Welcome to the Three Ravens live stream Q&A for July. Sorry, it's been a bit of a gap between the June one and the July one, but as I explained on Patreon, the sheer amount of Three Ravens related stuff was quite intense during that period, particularly doing the live show at the same time as keeping up the regular schedule. But anyway, that's boring. That's the past. Let's talk about Heartless Knaves things. So didn't have any particular questions that were submitted this time. So I thought I might just spend a moment or two, or the time we have at least, going through what's happened in the book from where we were last time we spoke to now, because quite a lot of stuff has happened. If you recall, the first thing that happened after the last live stream was we get Desiree training with Matthias and the first proper introduction of Umbrago. So we're starting to see that family, what they're like, which obviously is dysfunctional, but also very much inspired by the kinds of things that happened in the Tudor court. Not to say that Mary the First had the kind of experiences of martial training that Desiree receives, but I wanted that idea of what's it like having these siblings knocking around in a house together, when, particularly at this moment in time, the younger brother has been given the crown and has become the monarch, when the older sister has been skipped over for that. So yeah, that's kind of where we were, and we then moved into that kind of B plot territory where we're talking about the High Council and what's going on with that layer of villains who are basically managing the state. And Devas is, the Archbishop. He's the one who considers himself to be in charge. He thinks that he is in control of what's happening. And, as the story develops and as you learn more about the death of Silken and Rooks and the other also, you get the sense that he has tried to influence events to put himself in a position where he is the de facto monarch, which again was an important part of church life and what people in the church did during the Renaissance. They were always trying to pull strings, and it's a period of time where we know there was a debate and discussion about absolute monarchy, the degree to which the monarch was put into the position that they had because they were chosen by God, and that was the story that everybody was encouraged to believe in. And I'm not sure that many monarchs themselves sincerely believed that idea. I think that when you move into the Stuarts later on in British history, then they increasingly did really believe in it. Particularly Charles I. But I think at this point in time, it's a bit of propaganda, effectively, that's being put about, and you've got therefore Devas and these kind of elders, these power brokers, all of whom have got their own agendas and their own beliefs about how the state should be run. And when you're in that position where effectively you've got a king who's not actually in charge, and you've got somebody who is, managing the nation on their behalf, how does that work out? And me being me, I wanted to take that in some ridiculous situations. So from there, not only do you get Umbrago making these political comments around how he wants wars to go, how he wants to conquer other kingdoms, and so on and so forth, which that continues to be a subplot that the novel is engaged with as it goes on. But also this kind of basic joke moment where he decides that he wants a whore. And that idea of, a boy who is not sexually active, not understanding what he's asking for, but knowing suddenly that it's something that he's told he can't have, yet he's supposed to have absolute power and be the representation of God on earth. Well, he wants one anyway, even though he doesn't know what it is, and that then I think plays out across the course of the book in a really interesting way that obviously we'll talk about a bit more as that develops. And Umbrago's arc up to now, I think, we're talking after chapter 16 has been released. So not long ago, we had the Battle of Southwark, where, the other is effectively trying to get the head out of the city to reunite with the body, and knows it's going to come up against some resistance to that. It's going to find it difficult to get out of this walled city. Otherwise, so it turns itself into this horrendous creature, vast, kind of towering colossus made of meat and bone and blood. And of course, Brunhilde, who is this character that I hope when she was introduced, people thought maybe this is just an incidental character. Maybe this isn't somebody who really matters. I like the idea of bringing her into this kind of central storyline and making her a really important character, and elevating what might seem like a kind of minor concern or a minor idea, because sex work is one of those aspects of civilization that it's often presented to us in a way that's titillating, but there is a very real set of challenges and concerns around a life like that and a career like that. And I kind of wanted to play with that and discuss and give that some room to breathe. So I hope people enjoyed the Battle of Southwark. I hope that, the other being on the rampage proved to be as entertaining for you as I hoped it would be. And that's obviously a bit of an impression or a bit of a glimpse of the kinds of things that the other or Torsten can do. And of course, he's named the other, or it is named the other, very pointedly. The other, in a way, can be whatever it wants to be, and people then project fearful concepts onto Torsten, who, don't get me wrong, is incredibly powerful, but one wonders if he'd been treated better or was treated better, whether he would be quite as terrifying and ultimately kind of psychopathic as he is, because he cannot, he's not been raised to make the kinds of moral judgments and decisions that the average person would be. So, his journey, I hope, will continue to provide interesting food for thought. But the place where we were last time we spoke to the place we are now is quite relevant in the sense that we've got these High Council members sat around that table, and I hope you're now starting to enjoy spending just little fractional bits of time with them and getting a sense of who they are, how power has corrupted them, the extent to which you consider them to be dreadful. I think is, it's open a little bit. I think. I mean, I tried to make them slightly representative of different aspects of corruption, really. And the most obvious and sort of horrendous candidate for that, straight out of the gate, from the moment you really spend any time with him, is the Archbishop, who of course tries to seduce the serving boy, or abuse the serving boy, and to a certain extent is partially successful but interrupted by Devas, which, horror comes in many different forms, but I wanted to do something that I thought would be truly horrendous, and which of course, for many of us who are skeptical or alarmed by many, certainly historical religious practices in a traditional, kind of Christian or Catholic sense. All of those scandals around, how really people in these positions of power have used that power to do dreadful, dreadful, abusive things. I wanted to kind of cut through that and go, no, let's just see a moment of awfulness and sit with that moment of awfulness, because as you might imagine, bad things are coming Salaz's way. I hope you will enjoy um, what happens to him. He gets his just desserts, let's say. He gets his just desserts. So yeah, we moved on from there to, I hope balance serious concepts with silly and flippant ones. So, of course, Patrick fairly quickly entered into the novel after we last spoke. Obviously, love Patrick, sweet, innocent Patrick, stupid Patrick. But I'm interested to hear what people think about the animal thoughts, conversations. Obviously, rooks, we now know, can talk to animals. And so the conversations Rooks is having with these animals and the conversations the animals are having, what I hope is a fairly like reasonably rich inner life for some of these characters. I love the idea personally that you've got, Brian and Andronicus and Patrick as three different horses who even in the horses you've got a little bit of variety and personality type and people to invest in, hopefully. Because I do think animals are people, and I think that it's one of those things, the Dr. Dolittle thing. We all want to be able, in a way, to hear what animals think and what their inner monologues are like. And so I hope people are enjoying that aspect of the book and getting a sense of the pettiness of these animals and to some extent the ways in which they're hurt in some ways. And in a character like Patrick, you've got that kind of gleeful thing of he enjoys being Patrick and he enjoys the world, he enjoys life. Flowers and sunshine are very fine. I think, in a way, it would be lovely if we could all be a bit more Patrick to a certain extent. But then you've got that kind of what I would consider to be like novel stuff and kind of fun and games kind of business balanced out with darkness, right? And quite a lot of it in a way that I hope isn't like horrendous to encounter, whether you're reading on Archive of Our Own or if you're listening to the podcast episodes as the chapters are being released. A character like Torfy, who, he doesn't get a lot of book, but he has an arc. We learn about where he's come from, how he has been used, and the awful kind of traumatized man that he is before ultimately paying the price for the immoral behavior that he's engaged in, at the hands of Silken and Rooks and the Sunken Abbey's other denizens. You know, I think personally, obviously, I feel protective and proud of the novel and its various different bits of internal structure. But I feel like even in that, you've actually got quite a lot to think about when you think about an executioner. And I think executioners are a curious job that, thank goodness we don't have them anymore in this country. I know in lots of other nations, including the United States, they are obviously a feature of life. But when you read about the lives of executioners and who they were, how lonely that life was for a great many of them, the kind of sickness that it enabled or cultivated or prompted in them, I think that is a really interesting aspect of an executioner story. And so I wanted, for Torfy to be okay. He's a bad guy. He's an executioner. He's been killing people. He killed Silken and Rooks. But I hope that even in his death, there is a moment where you're like, oh man, this guy's also a victim. You can't necessarily excuse his bad behavior, but it's not like he's all bad. He's perverted, and through Astrid, I wanted to put this implication in that he's not capable of treating normal people, women, but anyone else really with any kind of normal regard or care. So he's been given this doll that he puts all of his affections into. I wanted that to be obviously a dark and strange notion where he was childlike in some regards, but being asked to do adult things in ways that, are dreadful. So I hope that that kind of little horror story arc, in a way, of Torfi and his undoing was interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. But of course, from a plot perspective, really, within the grander scheme of the book, that is about Sally's second vow, and you know creating this heart that then sorry, that's our doorbell. Creating the heart that ultimately Rooks needs to engage in a little bit more physical activity, let's say, and we'll be getting some more of Rooks cutting loose before very long. So the second vow, um, there's three. You hear a little bit about what Sally had been through for the first vow, which had involved giving up her capacity to reproduce. She can't bear children. Then after that, of course, she gives up her capacity to fall in love. And I think having a character who can't fall in love, I hope, is also quite interesting, in the sense that you obviously want her to be able to, and there's the possibility, to an extent, in Silkin maybe, but also perhaps in other people that she meets, that there might be possibilities for her to have fallen in love and to be happy in a kind of normal life. But she's actually incredibly dedicated to her long-term plans and objectives, which we're not really party to. Certainly at this point in the narrative, we know we've had some hints dropped, and we know that Nanny has been forging her, training her, subjecting her to things that, again, I don't think are good. I think that they are deeply morally grey, if not completely wrong. But I think there's an awful lot about becoming a nun that can be really quite problematic. But in the Heartless Knaves universe, the nuns are the people who are trained in fighting and in kind of physical manipulation of the world, whereas the men, the monks, they're the ones who are given the kind of apothecary type jobs that are less physical. I just wanted to kind of flip that a little bit and play with it. But anyway, so Sally's now reached this point where her kind of magical powers, she's made this sacrifice, and because she's made this sacrifice, she's got a kind of level up that we haven't really seen her use in the book. But nonetheless, I hope that learning a little bit more about that as a magic system, and that notion, we talked about it before on a live stream, about what you give is given back, or what you sacrifice is returned to you, in that kind of sort of Zoroastrian moral universe, to a certain extent. I mean, obviously, Zoroastrianism fed into kind of Christian philosophy, particularly early Christian philosophy. But from a plot point, purely on that level, she's had a bit of a level up, and Rooks has got a new heart, which means that he can crack on. What Rooks doesn't have, of course, is his gazings. He doesn't have his spectacles. And maybe it's a bit of a labored kind of joke to a certain extent. Maybe I mean, reading the chapters and performing them for the podcast and everything has made me reflect slightly on, maybe it is a bit too long a joke. But I wanted to consider, or for people to consider, how difficult life would have been if you didn't have spectacles and you needed spectacles at this point in time. How hard it was to get them. What was involved in being a lens grinder. I know it's not necessarily a very glamorous aspect of being alive. It's not a very glamorous thing to talk about in fiction, perhaps, but it's something that I don't really see ever discussed in books. And so I kind of wanted to engage in the idea of a spectacle maker or a gazings maker, the lens grinder, in the form of Growlspoiler. And also, of course, it's this way of preventing Rooks from just being this kind of all-powerful character to a certain extent. I mean, all great heroes have to have their Achilles heels. One of them, for Rooks is certainly the fact that his eyes aren't so good because he reads too much in the dark, and yeah, hasn't necessarily treated his eyesight with the respect that it perhaps deserved. So, Rooks, of course, soon will have his spectacles, and soon we'll start to get a sense of what he can actually do, because he's got a heart that can now pump with not necessarily full Rook's power, but certainly with more than it he would have had with the old friar's heart. Um, and then I'm hoping that Rooks, just to kind of touch on what's happening with him, that the kind of mystery and pain of his life is slowly, opening up a bit like a flower and unfurling its petals for you. Um, you've got his bond with Mooncaller, and his namesake, the rooks, the ravens that he talks to, and are his friends, and his desire to reach out to other animals he encounters to befriend them. Um, because I think that Rooks is raised to be a murderer and a powerful one and an assassin and a killer, but actually he doesn't really want to be that. Like, rationally speaking, he's wise enough to know that's no route through to happiness, and a big part of that for him comes from the fact that he's fallen in love, and about his love and about his relationship. Of course, there will be more to come. I don't want to talk about that too much, but I like the way that the people around Rooks, and when I say people, I mean like Mooncaller, for example, they are worried about him and how his vulnerabilities, his thoughts about love, his desires and wants are not necessarily the things that he is best at, or that he necessarily could be having the most impact on the world for the positive. Because for as much as he's a traumatized character, he's also a gifted character, and he can do lots of impressive things. But as with anyone who's been trained and kind of indoctrinated and raised to do immoral things, I think there's an internal wrestling match that's going on in there, where he doesn't really know what's best, how to behave. He just knows he needs to do some particular things. One of them he knows is stick up for Silken, in spite of Silken being exactly who Silken is, which is, not necessarily a well-meaning guy. He is a very scarred and very traumatized person. He makes a lot of glib comments, and he likes to make people laugh, and he likes to be the center of attention. But a lot of that comes from a kind of emptiness and a blankness and a sense of fear and a sense of trauma that comes from his childhood. And because Silken and Rooks know one another from a long time ago, their relationship is extremely complicated, and they need each other, because ultimately they know no matter what happens, the other will come to the rescue. And because they know they've got that absolute and fundamental bedrock, that kind of love, that kind of friendship. You know, Rooks knows that he needs to look after Silken. Silken has got them into this mess. Their hearts are lost. They could be killed at any moment through somebody destroying their heart remotely. They've got to get those things back. They want to be in control of their own lives and destiny. And so in Rooks, you've got this kind of begrudging, I would rather be trying to learn how to be a peaceful man. But in the immediate, I need to do these things, regrettably, for my friends, and for my friend who, to a certain extent, I feel like I've outgrown. I feel like I've entered into a new phase of life. Rooks, I think, is a far more mature character than Silken, who, he's got a bit of arrested development. He's kind of living in a nihilistic way, or a hedonistic way, where he seeks pleasure and seeks coin, and makes money to spend money, and sees his time as best used through waste. And I think that philosophy that Silken has is one that's going to be challenged across the course of this novel. And as much as Rooks might consider himself to be a more mature, more grown-up character in the next phase of his life, there are also things that he hasn't really addressed that mean that in a way he is still, a little boy, in a way. But more on that to come anon. Um, I think though that what I hope is proving to be interesting as we jump between these many story threads is seeing how everyone is on their own journey in the book. And one of the most important journeys, the titular journey, is that of Desiree, the Pale Princess. What's happening to her? And as I said right at the top of the conversation, when we first meet her, she's hanging out and flirting with her cavalry, horse riding teacher, who's also her archery teacher, and she's got a crush on him. And I wanted straight out of the gate with Matthias to present a handsome character, a charming character, a character who's flirtatious and whatever. But actually, what he's doing is completely wrong, and he's trying to seduce a teenage girl, and this teenage girl is not wise enough, as very few teenage girls tend to be, to recognize that what's going on is completely inappropriate. She's at a vulnerable point in her life. She's recently lost her father. Her brother has undergone this huge change because, of course, he's now got the king's heart in his chest. And Umbrago is wrestling with these kind of adult child, problems. But Desiree, I wanted to see how people might think about that initial relationship, and then to pull the rug very quickly and go, no, if you thought that this was the kind of book where, it's okay for a grown-up man to fall in love with a teenage girl, no, that's not okay. And let's quadruple underline this in the sense that, it's actually his mission to do that. He's a spy working as a double agent, and actually, with Vern and Gavriel, there's a kind of shadow or at least factional aspect of this government, such as it is, that is resistant to the new Devas contingent and the way that they've seized power through this kind of religious reformation. So there's a lot of tensions, I realize, going on there. But for Desiree, she's not cognizant of a lot of that. She's just waking up each day and doing what she's told to do. And she's being moved around and positioned and toyed with and played with and developed and manipulated ultimately, which is what happened to a lot of, royal children, frankly, historically speaking. And the person that she trusts is probably most of all Evelyn. And Evelyn is encouraging her and enabling her and kind of, spurring her on with this. So what other choices does she have? Well, the only choices she has is, when she has time alone, and, the choices that she can develop and consider in her own mind. And I hope that as a character, she's one that you are reading or listening to and thinking, God, what would I do in that situation? Because I don't think she has many choices. I don't think she has many options. And certainly the choices that she have, I don't think many of them are good. So I hope that's proving to be interesting. And then, you know, um, you've also got the likes of, well, Marco, and the other. Now, Thorsten's storyline throughout the book, he is an antagonist for sure. He's a terrifying and all-powerful baddie. But I wanted to have the other in the book to do a few things because, on the one hand, he's a member of the maligned, right? So he, like Selkin and Rooks, was raised at the Red Keep. He was engineered, but trained to be enabled to be this kind of deadly assassin experiment. And I can tell you now, he's not the only one that you're going to meet. But I wanted to present a kind of dramatic foil to Silken and Rooks, in Thorsten, but I also wanted to have a very physical and palpable kind of horrifying danger, that was horrifying in a, almost Lovecraftian kind of wiggly, squirmy worms kind of way, but a lot of death, blood, violence compared to the other forms of horror that come perhaps more subtly in power. We've spoken about the Archbishop and the Serving Boy, Sales, Devas, a lot of these people in positions of power, how they're using their power and influence and how they think about the power they've got and how they can exploit it. I think that is all horror writing. That's the way that I very much feel about it. I often think about politicians as being quite horrifying to a certain extent. And Thomas Hobbes, sure, he was writing later than the Renaissance, but when we talk about the Leviathan, his very important political tract, basically that whoever ends up ruling needs to be a monster. They kind of have to be a monster. It is an inhuman job being a head of state. Yeah, that's true to a certain extent, but my God, that's a depressing notion that you effectively have to become a creature that is, subhuman or beyond human in order to rule. I mean, we see it all the time, don't we? I alluded to the church earlier, but there's a lot of corruption in this world, and a lot of people who have power. And power, it's an old adage, it's a cliche to a certain extent, but power corrupts. And so I wanted to talk about different forms of that corruption. The other is one, he has a physical power that is almost unassailable to a certain extent, certainly based on the kind of power levels that we've encountered in the book so far. What do you do about a problem like that if it comes to kill you? Hopefully that's scary. But I also want it to be scary to think about, how religious figures can manipulate other people and whip masses up into baying mobs, and steer their passions and attentions, manipulate facts. There's a plague in Southwark. No, there isn't. But, a lot of that kind of how people in power perceive themselves as calling shots on a populace. I wanted to see or explore, firstly, how kind of ineffective that often is, particularly when people are being so deceitful, but also how fragile it is. And to perhaps take some joy in the Schadenfreude of seeing these people systematically pay for the horrors that they are inflicting on other people. But I also, I also hope people are finding Marco's journey to be intriguing, because again, we meet him so early. He could just be a completely throwaway character, a guard who is seduced and through his seduction enables Sally to steal Silken and Rook's head, right? She does her heist. We could have just left Marco at that point and not had any more of his story, but I wanted to follow that and just go, okay, well, what are the next steps? Because he's clearly not a good person when we meet him. He's evil in a kind of lazy, patriarchal, historical fashion. He behaves in many of the ways that the men of his time in the kind of station he's in probably would have behaved or would have liked to have behaved. And in a way, a lot of what is happening to him is a punishment, in kind of my moral kind of twisted way of thinking about things for the ways that he has behaved in the past. But I also want to reach a point where we're starting to go, well, hasn't this guy suffered enough now? And don't we actually feel like this bad guy deserves some kind of redemption or some kind of, I guess, like pleasantness or justice, and for things to reach an equilibrium. So yeah, I hope people are finding Marco's arc to be interesting. I don't like Eleanor. She's one of her favorite characters, Marco, and what happens to him. So So yeah, I'd be interested to hear what you think as well, because he's there in the Battle of Southwark, and you can just feel like this guy is in a terrifying state. We will, of course, pick up with what's happening with him shortly, and move on from there, because what can he do either? From being in a position where he's had a certain degree of authority and control in his life, which he's not necessarily used for good, he's now in a position where he has almost none. Um, how does one respond to being, effectively the other's prisoner, um, and to be, I guess, stripped of that, traditional machismo and patriarchal power? Um, Nicodemus, of course, has been on his own little kind of background burbly journey. He makes a strong entry into the book, Nicodemus, and he does, continue to feature and be a character. But he's now off on a sort of secret quest, and as one of the key kind of architects of how the book is going to um, work out. He isn't necessarily in every chapter physically, but he is in a way, because he has sketched it out and worked on it with Nanny. And so what's happening is more or less what Nicodemus wanted to happen, particularly as we move into the heist, which is going to play a big part of the sort of I guess, third and fourth acts of the book, should I say? But yeah, so Nicodemus is now off. We get his preaching though, and I hope that was reasonably interesting from a philosophical perspective. I'm using the word philosophical quite a few times, but maybe that's because the book is, to a certain extent, driven by philosophies and ideas of philosophy, and as much as it can be kind of puerile and silly, I hope it's also got some serious stuff going on under the bonnet that's making the machine move. Um, but I guess the main um, kind of protagonist relationship that is beginning to develop is the one between Silken and Sally. I hope, at least. And in Silken, I think Sally's encountering a source of competition. She's furious, she's jealous, she doesn't see why she isn't being used to do the things that Silken is being deployed to do, because she's capable. And there's also a personal exasperation that she feels with him because he is an exasperating person. You've got this assassin who names all of his weapons, and acts all flippant, and is so interested in clothes and so on. All of these kind of puerile preoccupations that he has, these bits of novelty and frippery, they're ultimately because he doesn't really care about things, or if he does, then he won't let himself, and so just kind of acts in this silly way. But even something like naming your weapons and giving them personalities and having them be your friends in lieu of having other friends, these things are quite pathetic in a way, in a true sense, I hope, in that you kind of feel a bit sorry for Silken, but at the same time he is this amazing deadly fighter, who does have lots of skills, which I'm also looking forward to kind of demonstrating as the novel goes on. But in his dynamic with Sally, you've got Sally, who's quite a serious person. She just wants to get on with the business of her life and her plans, and to see how it all works out. And she's spent some time having to hang out with this jerk of a character, and in a way they're chalk and cheese, in the sense that Sally is quite the chalky character in a way. She's a straight down the line, efficient machine made to achieve goals, and Silken, I don't think, is very efficient. I mean, he eventually gets there, eventually gets the job done, but he does it very much in his own kind of maverick and idiosyncratic sort of way. So the dynamic between the two of them, I'm hoping, is playing out in an interesting way. And interesting, I hope that, with Nanny and Christopher and Nicodemus and Silken and Rooks, that you've got this family. ultimately is what I wanted to try and explore, is this idea where none of these characters, are blood relations, but they have all lost their birth lives, their birth families, um, to either they've given them up or they've kind of moved away from them or whatever, but they've made themselves part of something different and chosen a family, and the family that they've chosen, is proving to be this weird bunch of misfits. And that kind of Sally, Rooks, Silken, roughly the same age, roughly, as characters. Are they um, brotherly, sisterly? Are they like siblings? Sally can't fall in love anymore. So, what can that even be? What's going on there? Can they just be contemporaries and friends? This is, hopefully, again, like a reasonably complex um, dynamic to have in a book that perhaps isn't entirely traditional. But I hope people are enjoying how that's starting to kind of develop and play out, and that Silken is happy to discuss the past and to tell Sally things and to imbue her with trust, and for Rooks to basically go, well, no, I do trust these people. I'm gonna do what they want because they brought us back from the dead. You should too. Let's see how this goes, and we will see how it goes, because the idea of being part of a family for Silken and Rooks is not normal. They're not used to that at all, and their rage with their father, as he was in effect their father figure, their role model figure, Espin, the Red Deacon, um, at the Crimson Keep. They hate him more than anything in the world because they recognize that they were mistreated, abused, distorted, manipulated, turned into ugly things as they see themselves. So that they're not used to concepts like love. And of course, with the Heartless Knaves, it's this concept of kinds of love, and how that can kind of unfurl and develop and be. Um, and hopefully not just in their relationships, but in someone like Umbrago's, where you've got this young boy he's got his father's heart in his chest, and his father's heart is cruel, and he still is a little boy with little boy's body and little boy's brain, and he's confused and a mess, and has also been raised to believe that he should be all powerful. That's going to create a messed up kid. So I wanted to have these moments that are deeply sinister. Obviously the one with Gillian, the Queen Mother, and Umbrago is like terrifying. At least I felt it was terrifying. Another moment of, I hope, unusual horror. This threat of this little boy who theoretically should have everything he wants, and all of a sudden he starts behaving inappropriately to his mother. What do you do about that? Angle his attentions elsewhere, and where that will go next. I'm hoping that you'll find it to be interesting, but that idea of his messed up love. I mean, theoretically, he is in a family, right? But is that royal family a loving place to be? Is it going to teach you how to be a healthy, happy human being? I would suggest not. So perhaps there are some people who can kind of, have a positive impact on Umbrago, but we will see. We will see about that, because he does need some parenting, doesn't he? He needs someone to look after him. So yeah, between those key ideas, like Desiree being trained, being used, Silken and Rooks slowly but surely arming up and getting ready to go off on their quest. Lots of political machinations, bit of action through the other, and the whole Torfy Heart heist, I guess you could call that as well. I hope that there's been plenty to keep you entertained in recent chapters. But as we move through the next few, and by the time we're doing our next live stream, we're also going to be shifting geographical location because, of course, Vestron has ridden out in his mysterious carriages, um, which don't have handles on the doors. What's that about? What's that? What's that? You've got to rob carriages that don't have handles. What's going on there? But yeah, so we're going to be moving to Vestron's neck of the woods. So I'm hoping that people will enjoy as that all starts to develop and happen. For those characters that are going to be dispatched, as in dispatched, sent off to that part of the country, the fictional country. But don't worry, we'll also have stuff happening at the court. You're still going to have a bit of Benny. You're still going to have a bit of Eris. You're still got to have all of those other members of the High Council, and none of them are good. They all deserve their just desserts. I'm going to say now, not necessarily every single one of them dies across the course of the book, but most of them do. And so, seeing how they are variously dispatched and by whom, I hope you will enjoy. So yeah, that's kind of a brief rundown. And I think that kind of in lieu of having any specific questions that anyone sent through, I hope you find that interesting and a good little bit of chat about the book. I suppose the other things to say are thank you so much for listening to it and for supporting Heartless Knaves. To give you a sense of how it's going in terms of downloads, I think so far about 1,500, which isn't bad. I mean, compared to Three Ravens numbers, that's very low. But what I'm finding really encouraging is week on week, it's evident that new listeners are getting stuck in. They are then beasting through the episodes and sticking with it. So I'm glad that the book is kind of growing, and it is increasingly finding, only in a small way, but it's nonetheless finding new listeners and new fans. I'm very, very happy about that. Anything you can do, of course, to spread the news and tell people about it, I'd really appreciate it. Because as kind of discussed in relation to Three Ravens, we only grow because other people and listeners help us to grow. So in the instance of the Heartless Knaves, it's still a relatively modest number of people who are engaging with the book at the moment. I'm hoping it will continue to grow and continue to build and reach something a little bit more monstrously large. I'm not necessarily saying the other style. I'd rather not have it become like an uncontainable murderous collection of bone and meat and flesh and blood and chaos. But I could go a little bit bigger, couldn't we? Yeah, a little bit bigger. So yeah, anyway, thank you so much for listening. And do please let me know if you've got questions for next time, if you've got thoughts on anything I've been speaking about in this chat, and if you've got stuff that you would like to know more about, stuff that you've really liked, stuff that you haven't liked. I'm interested in it all, really. So please, post your feedback on social media, on Patreon. All of that stuff would be great. And I hope you're having a great summer as well. I'll speak to you again soon, particularly through the chapters. But I will be better at organising the next live chat, and hopefully we can get some more people actually in attendance, because it's always a bit more interesting to have a conversation where there's some kind of live interaction with people than it is just me talking to a webcam. I know that you're there in a different point in time. I know, but it's a bit surreal for me, I have to say. All right, okay. Well, take care. Thank you very much. And I'll speak to you soon.